and he asked Chris Paul if he changed up the defensive assignment yesterday. And Chris said, no, I didn't change up the assignment. I just suggested, hey, we might want to have somebody else guarding Klay right now because Kawhi is not warm yet.
Paul was sent home by the Clippers because his leadership style clashed with the team. He had been vocal in holding management, coaches, and players accountable, which the team felt became disruptive.
A future Hall of Famer getting kicked off a team in the middle of the night, that's not a rumor. That's exactly what happened to Chris Paul. T240am. The 21-year veteran posted on Instagram that he had just been told he was being sent home. No warning. No explanation. Just gone. And instead of sympathy, the media immediately flipped the narrative, calling him difficult, labeling him a locker room lawyer, saying he was too disruptive for the Clippers to handle. But that story was a cover. Because once the footage leaked, everything changed. Chris Paul wasn't the problem, he was exposing one. And the moment the organization realized what he was pointing at, the entire building got uncomfortable. Here's what really went down. The Clippers were stumbling through an ugly start to the season. Losses were stacking up. Frustration was boiling. And Chris Paul, being who he's always been, started holding people accountable. He questioned coaching decisions. He challenged effort. He spoke up in meetings. According to the front office, that was too much. So team president Lawrence Frank flew to Atlanta to deliver the news in person. Publicly, the statement sounded clean. They were parting ways, and nobody was being blamed for the team's struggles. Professional. Polished. Safe. But there was a massive hole in that story. Because when you actually watch the game film, when you see what Chris Paul was reacting to in real time, something disturbing jumps off the screen. He wasn't being disruptive. He was exposing something the organization desperately wanted buried, and it involved their highest paid star. Against Cleveland, the Clippers were down 13 late in the fourth quarter. Donovan Mitchell was cooking them. Momentum was gone. The game was slipping away, so a 40-year-old Chris Paul, bad knees, winding down, 1 foot out of the league, took the Mitchell assignment himself. He fought over screens. He sprinted in transition. He gave max effort like the season depended on it. That's leadership. But on the other end of the floor, Kawhi Leonard's body language told a different story. After the Clippers scored, Darius Garland used a veteran stall move, letting the ball roll up the court to bleed clock. Chris Paul saw it instantly. He waved his arms, yelling for his teammates to pressure the ball. Kawhi didn't respond. He jogged back casually like it was a preseason run, not crunch time, and that moment? That was the beginning of the end. Because Chris Paul didn't get sent home for being difficult. He got sent home for telling the truth and making people powerful enough to feel threatened by it. Garland rolled the ball all the way to midcourt with zero resistance. By the time the Clippers finally reacted, Cleveland had burned 16 free seconds off the clock. Then Garland attacked, kicked it out, splash. Another three. Another dagger. From start to finish, the Cavs wasted over 30 seconds and still got a bucket. All because the Clippers refused to hustle back. And if that wasn't bad enough, the very next possession was even worse. The Clippers scored again. Kawhi jogged back at that same slow, careless pace. Garland saw it, smiled, and let the ball roll again. Why wouldn't he? Nobody was stopping him. That's the footage Chris Paul reacted to, the lack of urgency. The lack of accountability. The refusal to play winning basketball. But instead of backing him, the organization shipped him out, all because he dared to hold their franchise star to the same standard he's always held himself to, excellence. Here's the moment that says everything about this team. While everyone else jogged back like it was a summer scrimmage, Chris Paul, 40 years old, 1 foot out of the league, sprinted full speed to the backcourt to shut it down. That's pride. That's leadership. That's what this team desperately needed. Then the camera panned. Kawhi wasn't even in the frame. Let that sink in. A future Hall of Famer on his last legs, showing more urgency than a 2-time Finals MVP making over $50 million a year. One sequence that exposed the entire locker room. After the whistle, Chris Paul walked straight up to Kawhi and told him flat out, "Get up on the ball." Cleveland was bleeding them dry and nobody else was saying a word. The very next possession, Kawhi finally pressured the ball handler, which raises a serious question. If Chris Paul hadn't said anything, would Kawhi have kept jogging the rest of the night? And would anyone else on that roster have had the nerve to call him out? Probably not. And that silence is the real problem with the Los Angeles Clippers. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room: Kawhi Leonard's defensive reputation. Yes, he's got 2 Defensive Player of the Year trophies from his Spurs days, when he could lock up LeBron, KD, or anyone you threw at him. But NBA reputations live longer than actual performance. Once you're stamped as elite, the label sticks even when the effort doesn't. The tape tells a different story. Kawhi hasn't made an all-defensive team since 2021. Last season, his defensive rating was the worst of his career. Watch the games: the closeouts are slower, the rotations are late, and the energy that once terrified opponents is gone. These days, he's an offense-first star coasting on an old reputation. Chris Paul saw it and said it. And when he tried to hold their supposed leader accountable, the organization chose silence over truth. It was easier to punish the messenger than confront the problem. What finally sealed his fate came after a loss to Dallas. Kawhi had just checked back in and was struggling to stay in front of Klay Thompson. He wasn't warm. He looked heavy. Klay was cooking him. During a timeout, Chris Paul calmly asked if Kawhi felt fresh enough to take that assignment. Kawhi admitted he was still catching his breath, so Paul suggested a temporary switch until Kawhi got his legs under him, a smart veteran adjustment that actually helps teams win. The Clippers made the switch. And that's when everything went sideways. The next day, assistant coach Jeff Van Gundy pulled Chris aside and asked if he had changed the defensive assignment. Paul explained he'd only suggested a quick adjustment to help the team. Van Gundy's response was ice cold. He told Chris that whatever leeway he'd had elsewhere, he didn't have it in Los Angeles. And in that moment, Chris Paul realized this was no longer about basketball, it was about control. And anyone who dared to question how the Clippers operated, even a legend like Chris Paul, was going to pay the price. A 12-time All-Star. Over 2 decades in the league. One of the highest basketball IQs ever. And he was told he didn't have permission to make common-sense suggestions in a game his team was losing. Let that sink in. Chris Paul was basically told to sit down and stay quiet. Not long after that confrontation, he went silent, but not for long. He posted one cryptic image on social media. A screenshot of the dictionary definition of the word leeway. No caption. No explanation. Just that one word. Now we know exactly what he meant. What makes this even more wild is what happened next. When the Clippers sent him home, Kawhi Leonard and James Harden went to the media acting shocked, saying they had no idea it was coming. That was a front. Multiple reports later revealed the truth. Both stars were tired of Chris Paul holding people accountable. They were fed up with being called out for lazy defense, bad habits, and low urgency. And insiders say they not only knew the move was coming, they signed off on it. When Paul got the call, Kawhi and Harden reportedly felt relieved. Think about that. The highest paid players on the team watched a veteran leader get pushed out for telling the truth and quietly supported it first. Kawhi respected the criticism. But over time, accountability started to feel like nagging. Harden, meanwhile, never wanted CP3 on the roster to begin with. Their Houston history was rocky, and this time his concerns weren't about personality, they were about control. What you're really looking at is a locker room run by comfort, not accountability. The two franchise stars cared more about keeping the peace than being pushed to improve, and the front office chose their comfort over winning. That's when it stopped being about Chris Paul and started being about the culture. When Paul was sent home, the Clippers were 6-18. They had lost 8 of their last 10 games. They ranked 25th in defense and 19th in offense, brutal numbers for a roster this expensive. The team was falling apart, and the one man brave enough to demand better was the one who got removed. Nobody else on that roster was going to check Kawhi Leonard. Everyone else is worried about their next contract, their image, and staying in management's good graces. Nobody wants the difficult label that can ruin negotiations. But Chris Paul didn't care anymore. His career is winding down. He wasn't chasing another deal. And that freedom made him dangerous to a front office that values silence over honesty. The Clippers would rather lose quietly than win with accountability. Now they're trapped. Over $50 million still owed to Kawhi next season. Harden sitting on a $42 million player option. No draft picks to rebuild. No clean reset. No voice left in the locker room willing to tell the truth. Steve Ballmer poured billions into this franchise, a new arena, superstar talent, championship dreams, but money couldn't buy what really matters: accountability on paper, this team looks powerful. Behind the scenes, it's a culture where nobody dares to speak truth to power, with ongoing cap scrutiny, injuries, chemistry problems, and a fan base running out of patience. Every loss slams the championship window shut a little more. Chris Paul's legacy is complicated, one of the greatest point guards ever, yet labeled hard to play with. And both can be true at the same time, but what nobody can deny anymore is what the footage showed: he wasn't being dramatic. He wasn't being petty. He was calling out real, visible effort problems from players who should absolutely know better. Sometimes the difficult person in the room isn't the problem, they're just the only honest one. Chris Paul walked out of that building with receipts, and now the whole world has seen exactly what he saw. The real question is whether the Clippers will ever face it. Because fixing the real problem would mean having uncomfortable conversations with the players making the most money, and history shows this. Organization doesn't have the stomach for that, so they'll keep losing, keep blaming the wrong people, and keep wondering why nothing works. Meanwhile, a 40-year-old point guard with 1 foot out of the league showed more heart, pride, and commitment to winning than stars making 10 times his salary. And honestly, that tells you everything about what's really broken in Los Angeles.